You wake up when your body feels ready. No alarm clock, no schedule, no office waiting for you. You sit up, stretch, and ask yourself one simple question. What should I do today? For nearly 99% of human history, this wasn't just a thought experiment. This was normal life. Every single morning, for almost 300,000 years, humans woke up this way. And the answer to that question looked nothing like the world we live in today. Modern humans spend around 90,000 hours of their lives working. That's nearly 1/3 of your entire waking existence dedicated to a job. But for most of human history, jobs didn't exist. There were no salaries, no bosses, no career ladders, and no fixed schedules. So what did people actually do all day? Let's start with what we know for sure. In 1963, archaeologist Richard Lee conducted a study that completely changed how scientists viewed prehistoric life. He observed the daily routines of the Ju-Hwansi people in Botswana, one of the few remaining groups living in a lifestyle similar to pre-agricultural humans. What he discovered was shocking. Adults spent only about 2.5 days per week gathering food. That equals roughly 15 to 20 hours of work. The rest of their time was spent relaxing, socializing, creating things, telling stories, or simply doing whatever they wanted. And this pattern appears almost everywhere anthropologists look. The Hadza in Tanzania, the Aceh in Paraguay, the Martu people in Australia. Completely different environments, different cultures, different continents. Yet the same result keeps appearing again and again. Humans only needed around 15 to 20 hours per week for survival. For comparison, most modern people work more than double that. Now, some of you might be thinking, but those are modern tribes. How do we know ancient humans lived the same way? Fair question. The answer comes from bones. When archaeologists compare the skeletons of ancient hunter-gatherers with early farming populations, the differences are dramatic. Early farmers were shorter, their bones showed signs of nutritional deficiencies, their teeth were filled with cavities caused by grain-heavy diets. Many had arthritis in their spines from repetitive labor, and they often died younger. But ancient hunter-gatherer skeletons tell a different story. They were generally taller, stronger, healthier, and had far less joint damage. Their teeth were in much better condition. Their bodies suggest they were doing less repetitive physical labor, not more. But the most fascinating evidence comes from something archaeologists never would have expected if survival was truly a non-stop struggle: art. In 1994, explorers discovered Chauvet Cave in southern France. Inside were paintings created nearly 30,000 years ago. Horses, lions, and rhinoceroses painted with perspective, movement, and shading. These weren't simple stick figures. This was sophisticated art that required skill, patience, and most importantly, time. Someone spent hours, maybe even days, deep inside a cave illuminated only by firelight, painting animals on stone walls. Not for survival, not for food, but for beauty, meaning, and expression. In Blombos Cave in South Africa, archaeologists discovered 100,000-year-old shell beads with tiny holes carefully drilled into them, clearly designed to be worn as jewelry. The nearest coastline was around 20 kilometers away. Someone walked nearly 40 kilometers round trip just to collect shells, then spent hours drilling holes into them using stone tools, simply to make something beautiful. And in Germany, researchers uncovered a 40,000-year-old flute carved from a vulture bone. It had 5 perfectly spaced finger holes. Whoever made it understood music. They understood pitch and sound, and they dedicated valuable time crafting an instrument, not for hunting or defense, but purely for music. These discoveries are not isolated cases. Across Europe, Africa, and Asia, archaeological sites dating back tens of thousands of years contain decorative objects, detailed carvings, sophisticated tools, musical instruments, and artwork that required hours of focused effort with no immediate survival purpose. This is what humans did when they weren't searching for food. They created, they decorated, they told stories. They made life beautiful. So let's imagine an ordinary day. You wake up around sunrise. The fire from the previous night is still softly burning. Someone adds more wood to keep it alive. Breakfast is simple: leftover meat, fish, berries, or nuts collected the day before. People sit together while eating. They talk casually, they joke, share stories, and loosely discuss what they might do today. Not because a schedule demands it, but because that's simply what humans naturally do. Later in the morning, a small group may head out to hunt or gather food. But here's the important part. You don't go hunting every single day. If the hunt was successful 2 days earlier and there's still food available, you might not leave the camp at all. Instead, you spend the morning repairing tools, sharpening spears, weaving baskets, or scraping animal hides until they become soft enough to use as clothing or shelter material. And this wasn't work in the modern sense. There were no time clocks, no supervisors, and no deadlines. People did these things because skill mattered, because competence earned respect, because creating useful things with your hands is deeply human. And if a hunt did happen, it wasn't the dramatic sprint you see in movies. Humans were persistence hunters. We tracked animals over long distances at a steady pace, sometimes for hours, until the animal overheated and collapsed from exhaustion. Humans are one of the only species capable of doing this efficiently because we can sweat and regulate our body temperature while running. Most animals can't. So instead of outrunning prey, we simply outlasted it. A typical hunt could last anywhere from 3 to 6 hours, including tracking, travel, and carrying the animal back to camp. Then the meat would be butchered and shared among everyone. By early afternoon, most of the truly necessary work was already finished. And what happened next is the part modern people struggle to understand the most. Nothing and everything. People rested. They sat together in the shade, talking for hours. They played with children. They groomed one another, picking through hair and reinforcing social bonds. They carved designs into bone or stone. They made jewelry from shells, animal teeth, and beads. Sometimes they simply lay down and slept. Anthropologist James Sussman documented that among the Zhou Huanzi people, adults spend nearly 6 hours every day in what he called social time. Not working, not sleeping, just being around other humans, talking, laughing, sharing stories, making jokes. Because in a world without money, police, or written contracts, survival depended entirely on relationships. If people disliked you, they might not share food when you were starving. So humans invested enormous amounts of time into friendships, trust, and connection. Not because it increased productivity, but because it was essential to staying human. Then the sun would begin to set, and something remarkable happened. In 2014, anthropologist Polly Weissner analyzed hundreds of hours of recorded conversations from the Zhou Huanzi people. During the daytime, conversations were mostly practical. Who spotted animal tracks? Where could food be found? Who wasn't sharing fairly? But at night, around the fire, everything changed. Nearly 81% of conversations became stories, myths about how the world began, legends of ancestors who accomplished impossible things, funny stories that made everyone laugh, tales about distant places and strange experiences. Weissner argued that this nighttime storytelling may have been where human culture itself was born. Religion, spirituality, history, dreams about the future. All the ideas humans only have time to think about when they feel safe and fed. And people didn't sleep the way modern humans do today. Historical records from medieval Europe, along with sleep studies conducted in the 1990s, suggest that before artificial lighting, humans naturally slept in 2 separate phases. The first sleep lasted around 4 hours. Then people would wake up for 1 or 2 quiet hours during the night, often reflecting, talking softly, praying, or simply lying awake in darkness, before returning to a second sleep for another 4 hours. So if you reconstructed an average human day thousands of years ago, it might look something like this. Around 4 to 6 hours spent hunting, gathering food, or crafting tools. Roughly 6 hours spent socializing, storytelling, playing, grooming, and bonding with others. About 8 hours of sleep divided into 2 phases, and the remaining time, resting, watching clouds, sitting near the fire, doing absolutely nothing productive, simply existing without needing to constantly justify your existence. Then, around 10,000 years ago, everything changed. Humans living in the Fertile Crescent began planting seeds and domesticating animals. Agriculture was born, and in many ways, agriculture became a trap. Once farming began, populations increased rapidly because farms could feed more people than hunting and gathering ever could. But more people required even more food, which required even more farming. Within only a few generations, populations exploded to the point where there was no going back. There were simply too many mouths to feed through the old lifestyle. Humans became locked into agriculture, and farming demanded far more labor than hunting and gathering ever had. Plowing fields, planting crops, weeding, harvesting, storing food, protecting crops from animals and raiders. The skeletal evidence is clear and consistent. Early farmers worked harder, ate worse diets, and died younger than the hunter-gatherers who came before them. But populations continued growing, and with larger populations came specialization. Toolmakers, potters, weavers, inventors, soldiers, priests, administrators, and eventually something entirely new appeared: jobs, employment, the idea that your time belonged to someone else in exchange for resources. By the time humans built cities, the original human lifestyle had almost completely disappeared. It was replaced by schedules, obligations, deadlines, and systems that required people to work most of their waking lives simply to survive. Today, the average person spends around 90,000 hours working. Your ancestors spent far less. You sleep in one uninterrupted block and call waking up at 2 a.m. insomnia. They slept in 2 phases and used those quiet middle hours for thought and reflection. You spend your life chasing success, wealth, status, and achievements defined by society. They woke up every morning already free, already enough, with nothing to prove to anyone. They didn't need to become successful. In many ways, they were already living the kind of peaceful life modern people hope to someday retire into. You make art only if you can find time after work. They made art because they already had time, and that's what humans naturally do. We create, we imagine, we tell stories. We are not a different species from our ancestors, but modern life is so different from the way humans lived for 99% of our existence that it almost feels like we are. We traded freedom for security, leisure for population growth, time for productivity.